Welcome to another edition of A Voice to the Gentile Church. I'm Jim Wingerter, and next to me is Pastor Roger Diaz. Dolores can't be with us this show. So there's interesting things going on in the world everyone's fully aware of, I'm pretty sure. You asked me to do a little research. I searched, the statement that I searched was the history of Palestine. And it came up in Wikipedia, and Wikipedia says this article is about the history of Palestine for the subject of a Jewish focus. See History of the Jews and Judaism in the Land of Israel. So they have parallel articles that are there to appease whichever group is speaking. Right. It's fairly obvious with every article that I read where the heart of the writer of the article is, what camp they're standing in, whether they're biblical or whether they're
paradigms play an important role. We're going to try and present this from a biblical paradigm.
Right. Therein is a problem also, because when I was a kid and I got a Bible for being in my Sunday school class till I was 12, they gave me a Bible, and in it there were maps of Palestine.
Most Bibles will have that. We got different paradigms, different perspectives on the whole thing, and we want to just filter through all of those or navigate through all of those and bring this from a biblical point of view. You have political Zionist point of view, you have a religious Zionist point of view, you got a non-Zionist point of view, you got a Palestinian point of view, you've got a United Nations point of view, you've got a woke point of view. So you got many points of view on this, and who's right? Well, I think the Bible, added to a historical perspective, an accurate historical perspective, will bring us to a proper understanding.
Right.
So we don't like to see what we're seeing today. People are dying. The people that are being called Palestinians are suffering, and most of them, as you know, and we don't even have to research this. We've been talking about this for a long time.
Long time.
The people that are being called Palestinians today are actually a mixture of a fusion of Egyptians, Jordanians, Arabs, that are sort of thrown together. How did they end up in the land of Israel? Well, that's what we need to talk about. All right. So we'll go into a little biblical history, and we'll come to contemporary history or history of the last 150 years. So just to end the statement that I was about to make, how did they end up in the land? This hodgepodge, this fusion of people. Well, the modern Zionist movement, right, last century, late 1800s.
Right.
That movement of the people of Israel coming into the land of Israel from the diaspora really upset the Muslim authorities. Right. During that time, you had a caliphate, which was the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
The Ottoman Empire historically has always been relatively favorable to Jews. So the Ottoman Empire, as a caliphate in the late 1800s, wasn't that concerned necessarily about Jews. In fact, they had participated and aided in Jews returning to the land, going all the way back to Sultan Suleiman. Now, who began to get really concerned is the early movements of the Muslim Brotherhood movement. You know, the Egyptians, the Saudi Arabians, the Jordanians, they began to become really concerned.
But all of this is like into the 1900s, 1920s.
Late 1800s, early 1900s.
I mean, Samuel Clemens, which is Mark Twain, went to the land.
There was nothing
there. Were just a few families in Jerusalem.
Bedouins and so on. But by then, the land was much more populated then than it was 100 years before that.
Right.
So it began to, as Jews returned to the land of Israel, what happened? So does go back to the Ottoman Empire, when the Sultan Suleiman the Great, opened the doors for Jews from Spain, Portugal, from different parts of Europe to come into the land of Israel. That, in earnest, began the Zionist process, right? And what became the modern Zionist process. So by the mid-1800s, late 1800s, the Muslim world had become very concerned about what they were seeing, that Jews were returning and settling into the land, and that the land was beginning to respond to them. So somewhere
it's a land that was previously ruled by Islam, right?
Well, yeah. Of course, we know that it went back and forth during the periods of the Crusades and so on, but it went Roman to Catholic to Christian, and then it went to Muslim, went back to Roman or Crusader, went back and forth. But the movement that really upset the Muslim world, Islam, I should say, was that these Jews that were returning to the land in the 1800s were saying, we're coming back because this is the time of the redemption. Now, the Muslims are shrewd enough, biblically shrewd enough, to understand what that means.
Yeah, they are.
And that concern ultimately led them to push into the land, to infuse into the land of Israel their refugees, their criminals, their unwanted masses, just force them in there. They came from the north and the east, they came from the south. The area that we call Gaza is mostly Egyptians. Egyptians that were pushed into that area in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and became known as the Palestinians. Okay, we'll talk about what this all means. Now, intermingled with those Egyptians, of course, were some Midianites, who are Midianites or Arabs.
Right.
Some of them. Now, the West Bank now, which is on the west coast, the west end of the Jordan River, right, in Samaria, the West Bank now is mostly Jordanians.
Right. So when they say West Bank, they mean the West Bank of Jordan.
West Bank of Jordan.
Because when you look at a map of Israel, it's on the east side.
Yeah, Ramallah, Jenin, and so on. So, literally, as Jews began to return to the land of Israel, based on the prophecy or the prophecies that we see in the Bible, I mean, ancient prophecies, goes all the way back to Mount Sinai concerning the restoration of Israel.
Right.
So when the Muslims saw that, again, they began to force their refugees and their unwanteds into the land of Israel. For what purpose? To be an impediment to any prospect of a Jewish state coming into existence. And they incited violence right at the very beginning against the Jews. So you can say it's anti-Semitism, but it's, to me, it's way beyond anti-Semitism. It's anti-Israelism, it's anti-Zionism for sure, anti-Semitism, but it's really anti-God when you get down to it. It's anti-God. Why is it anti-God? Because this Muslim movement that has plugged these people into the land, and let me say this, I feel bad for those people. My heart does go out to those people because in many cases they don't want to be there. They have no choice but to be there. And so they are the worst kind of pawns that you can ever imagine. In a game of chess, you give up your pawns, right?
Right.
But these people are pawns for sure, but they're the worst kind of pawns, the most expendable of pawns that you can think of. And they're forced into the land, and whenever there's any slight hint of a movement of they wanting to be free, the Muslims authority will just crack down on them with the worst kind of treatment. So they are literally people that are plugged in there to be impediments to the possibility of a Jewish state. And they've been succeeding. Why? Because from the very beginning, the League of Nations on to the United Nations have been supporting these people that are called Palestinians. So why Palestinians? Where did that come from? All right, let's talk a little bit about Bible history.
Yeah.
So we know the story of Abraham, right? Abraham left Ur of the Chaldeans and he went to Haran. In Haran, God said to Abraham, go to the land that I will show you. And he went. He took his family, Lot went along with him, and they entered into what will become the land of Israel, the promised land.
Right.
First stop was Shechem, right?
Right.
At Mount Gerizim, the oaks of Moreh, oaks of Elon, the oaks of Elon, the oaks of, is it Oak of Elon? The Moreh.
I always get it mixed up with the one down by Hebron.
That's Moreh, okay, so Mamre. So, all right. So he stops at Gerizim, and he offers up an offering to God, an approach to God. And that's where you begin to see a relationship between Abraham and God being developed. From there, he went to Bethel. At Bethel, he made another offering, another approach to God. And from Bethel, he went to Hebron, and then later to Beersheba, made another offering at Hebron. And so you have Abraham, from the standpoint of the Bible, establishing God's will for him and his descendants in the land of Israel by offering up offerings, korbanot, sacrifices, not such a good word, but he offered up these offerings as approaches by which he can then begin to approach God and have a relationship with God.
Right.
So Abraham and his descendants, their relationship with God is based on these offerings that was made on behalf of what will become the nation of Israel. So Abraham came into the land, he encountered the Canaanites, got along relatively well with the Canaanites. There was no Philistines. There were no Philistines in the land at that time. Not at that time. The Philistines came in shortly after Abraham.
Okay.
We'll talk about who the Philistines are.
Right. Okay.
So Abraham never encountered the Philistines. Isaac or Jacob never encountered the Philistines. So Abraham's descendants now, 70 souls, entered into Egypt, who were the sons of Jacob. They entered into Egypt, and with their wives and family, and they began to become a nation in Egypt. 400 years later, they're about 3 million strong, and God brings them out of Egypt. Now, the time during that 400-year period, as far as the historians are concerned, is when these people began to amass right there on the coast. Who were the Philistines? Let's talk about the Philistines. The word Philistine is Pelishti in Hebrew. Pelishti, and the region is called, in Hebrew, the actual place where they settled is called Pilishat. Pilishat, I think it is. Pilishet. So they called the region there Pilishet, and the people were Pilishti. So these Pilishti, who became known as the Philistines, right? You can hear it, phonetically you can hear it.
Sure.
Who settled there in that area. They were not Canaanites. They were not Canaanites. They certainly were not Arabs or Egyptians. They were Phoenicians. They were Aegeans. Basically, they were Greeks. And they were Phoenician people. The Phoenician people, from time immemorial, even before, at the time of Abraham even, they were seafaring people. They had governed the entire eastern Mediterranean Ocean. Ultimately, the Phoenicians would govern the entire Mediterranean Ocean. So the Phoenicians are actually the Philistines. And you can hear the similarity in the pronunciation.
And they stayed on the coast. They lived in coastal cities, and they fought with Israel, but they never really wanted to take over the land of Israel.
Yeah. So the root word there for the Phoenicians, seafaring people that will come from the sea, Phoenicians, right? The word Pelishti, in Hebrew, literally means invaders. So you have the Phoenicians, people that will come from the sea, seafaring people that comes from the sea, and you have invaders. So these Philishti, who we call Philistines in the Bible, were invaders. They came in, they took territory. Whose territory? They took the Canaanite territory. And they set up camp right there between the 3 continents, right?
Yeah.
You have Africa, Europe, and Asia. Very strategic place if you're going to conduct business, right?
And right on the ocean, right on the Mediterranean Sea.
And that's what they did. They were there to conduct business. They were traders. They were weapon makers. Metallurgy was their thing. And they made the best weapons. They invented the compound bow. They made chariots. They were excellent mercantile people when it came to instruments of war. And they were manufacturers as well. They basically stated themselves because they were Japhetic. They didn't intermingle with the Canaanites who were Hamitic. They stated themselves. They had their own deity, and they were different from the Philistines, from the Canaanites completely. So they came in right during that 400-year period when Israel was taking form, taking shape in Egypt. All right, so God brings Israel out of Egypt. He delivers Israel from Egypt, comes to Mount Sinai, and from Mount Sinai, Moses and Joshua brings them to the entrance into what will become the land of Israel, the promised land. All right, I'm going along in this historiography now. I'm trying to get to a certain point. So as they come into the land, God says to them to destroy the Canaanites. God was focused on the Canaanites, who were also referred to as the Amorites.
Right.
The Canaanites, the leading tribe of the Canaanites were the Amorites. And the Amorites were sort of the headship of the Canaanites. God was concerned about removing, displacing the Canaanites, the Amorites. He never mentioned the Philistines, but naturally the Philistines were a problem.
Right.
And so ultimately, during the period of the Judges, we see like with Samson and Shamgar,
Right.
a conflict develops with the Philistines in the south. You know, they were of the tribe of Judah, and
They bordered them.
So
Yeah.
suddenly you have this confrontation between Judah and the Palestinians. If we say Palestinians, but Philistines, and you'll talk about why Palestinian and not Philistia. So these Philistines, these Philistine, became a problem during the period of the Judges because they didn't want to go. Israel was in the process of removing the Canaanites, which they never really succeeded.
Right.
Right, the conquest of the land of Israel by Israel was not ever complete. But the Philistines was a problem because they were powerful people. They knew how to make weapons, and they knew how to make weapons. And they didn't plan to go anywhere. They were profiteering from it.
Sure.
Right?
And they're on a major trade route, so there were plenty of people to buy their wares.
They were right. They were trading. War was their business, and they were trading between warring factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they were doing good. They didn't plan to go anywhere. And so this problem developed. And then that takes us to King David. So from Samson to King David, the problem of the Philistines never got any better. King David, now we know the story of King David and Goliath. He killed Goliath, and over the time of his kingship, he would subdue greatly the Philistines. Never really defeated them. His son Solomon now did much more to bring the Philistine kingdom to a place of almost being completely destroyed. Who destroyed the Philistines? Well, it was Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians. The Babylonians finally succeeded to just do away with them completely. So by the 5th century BC, there were no Philistine in the land. The Phoenician people were then no longer in the south where Gaza is. They were concentrated where Lebanon is on the coast. That was Phoenicia. But the Philistines, who were Phoenician people, but their purpose was to make weapons, were completely gone, erased from the land. So, 586 BC, going forward, there are no Philistines in the land. Now, I'll say this. The Philistines gave Israel the most trouble. I mean, during the period of the Judges and during the period of the Kings, up to Solomon, they gave Israel the most grief because they were strong. They were strong people. For much of the period of the Judges, Israel were hiding in caves and using clubs and stones for weapons, whatever weapons they can pick up here and there, like leftover in battle and so on, they would have, but they were not that people that would produce chariots. Later on, they got really good at chariot making and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the Philistines came to an end. What happened? Well, Judah was taken out into Babylon, the northern kingdom was taken out into Assyria, and you had this diaspora that was unfolding. Jews began to return to the land of Israel. We know the narrative. Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel built the temple, and then you have Jewish life, growing and blossoming again in the land of Israel. The Hashmonite kingdom came into existence, the Maccabees, and that brought Israel to a zenith, the Jewish nation to a zenith in their existence in the land of Israel again, post-Babylonian destruction. there were no Philistines. There were no mentions anywhere in the book of Maccabees.
Right.
The latter prophets of the Hebrew prophets, none. They're done. They're over. Babylon took care of the Philistines. Now, the Romans got involved, right? We know that. The Romans got involved because the Grecians, the Seleucid Empire, couldn't handle Israel. In fact, the Seleucid Empire had come to an end. Antiochus Epiphanes died, and there was no more vim and vam in the Grecians to hold Israel. In fact, the Grecians began to encounter the Romans in the west, and they couldn't
They were
hold
preoccupied with them.
So the Romans now become the governing kingdom over Israel.
Right.
They didn't want it.
Well, we see that in Ben-Hur. We see that in the life of Jesus.
The Romans never enjoyed or had a good time dealing with Israel.
No.
Israel and Jerusalem, the Jewish people, was always a plight, always a difficulty for them. Okay, so what happened? In 70 AD, we know the history, in 70 AD, the Romans finally decided that's it, no more. And they put a lot of resources into the destruction of Jerusalem. They didn't want a repeat of what happened during the Maccabees. So they put a lot of resources into that campaign against the Jews, and they succeeded. Now, it was God's hand.
Right.
We know that Jesus said, just before this happened, 30 years before it happened, Jesus said, these are the days of vengeance that are spoken of by the prophets. And he was speaking specifically about what would happen to Jerusalem. So it was God's hand that brought Jerusalem to an end, to carry out his prophecy, right? A complete dispersion of Israel. So now, Jerusalem gave the Romans a bit of a hard time. I think it was a 3-year siege. Finally, the walls were breached and they succeeded to destroy Jerusalem. And then 70 AD was sort of the year that it all came to an end. So Jews began to be driven out from the land, together with Christianity, by the way, early Christianity. But the Jewish people were persistent. They were determined that the time of Mashiach was then, and that they would have a repeat of the Maccabee type scenario. And they kept coming back in. You had the Bar Kokhba revolt. You had many different revolts, many different messiahs that came upon the scene. Finally, Hadrian, it was Titus who destroyed Jerusalem.
Right. That's the arch in Rome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, Hadrian, who was an emperor who came about 100 years later, said, that's it. I had enough. I'm going to put everything I have and just plow the land.
Right.
And he did.
Right.
Masada was a part
Literally
of that.
plowed it like a farm field.
But didn't stop the Jews from coming back in. But what he did was to sort of declare victory over the Jewish people, these pesky, Jews. He named the land Aelia Palestia, right?
Right. After
the ancient enemies.
Philistines.
Right. After the Philistine. The Philistine. And that was to say to the Jewish people, you're done. The land is now given back to your ancient enemies, even though they don't exist.
Right.
And it stayed that way. It remained known as Palestine.
Right.
Or Philistia.
Why it showed up in our Bible maps.
So you tell us why Philistia becomes Palestine. I think you know.
I'm not sure where you're going, though.
Okay, so Philistia, or the Philistines, becomes Palestine.
Right.
So you have a F sound in Philistia.
The language, yes. So P and PH are the same letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and a dot would indicate one or the other.
Right. So when an Arab, the Arabic language, there's no P.
P.
Right. So
right.
when they say Palestine, they say Philistia.
Right.
Or Philistine. But the idea that somehow the true, actual Philistine people exist, the people that were carried over from biblical times, is just wrong. So there's no legitimate, as far as the Bible is concerned, even from a standpoint of archaeology or history, there is no legitimate claim of the land of Israel for the quote-unquote Palestinian people, because they never existed, not since 586 BC or they're around there.
Right.
So it's a myth. And why is this myth being persisted upon? Well, I'll tell you. You know, the
Yes.
Balfour Declaration
But please do,
and
right.
all of the difficulties that the land of Israel, the Jewish people, had posed for the fledgling globalist movement, right, of the 1920s and so on. And they had to come up with solutions. So they came up with the Balfour Declaration that the Jewish people will have a land to return to. Prior to that, and even after that, the land was Palestine.
Right.
And Jews who lived in the land of Palestine, they were Palestinians.
Right.
Right.
Golda Meir, I saw a clip today on Facebook.
Okay, they
Referred to herself as a Palestinian.
They had birth certificates that said
And
Palestiners,
passports, right.
Passports, all of their legal material, literature, all of their official dealings were as Palestine, or
Plishti.
Pishti or Philistines. So what happened? 1948, Israel becomes a nation, independence. And they decided, well, this is Israel. We are Bnei Israel. We are the people of Israel, and we're going to name this land Israel.
Right.
And that's where the problem comes in. Because when you change the name of the land from Philistia or Palestine to Israel, based on the reality that the people of Israel has returned to the land, of course, that created a problem. Now, that problem could have been overlooked or pushed aside quite easily. But the nations persisted on it because it gave their resistance against Israel an identity, something that they can handle. This is Palestine. It gave them something that they can work with. So they just hanged on to it, and they refused to let it go. Of course, we're talking about the Brits, but what about the Muslims? Well, the Muslims learned quickly that if we can claim this land as being Palestine, right? If we can stay with that, then it will give us something to lever with.
Right.
Something to contest them with. And that's where it really comes from. Arafat, remember Arafat?
Yes.
Was he a Palestinian?
He referred to himself as...
He was an Egyptian.
Right.
Born and raised in
His wife
Egypt.
was from Chicago.
Arafat he's supposed to be the first leader of
The PLO.
in a sense, the first president of the Palestinian people, right?
Right.
But he was an Egyptian, as most of the Gazans are actually
Yes.
Egyptians.
Yeah.
That again, like I said at the beginning, that were forced into that land to impede Israel's progress, and they were given a pseudonym of the Palestinians to continue that oppression, that resistance against Israel. Now, how did Israel respond to that? Israel initially didn't contest it. Israel began to come against it when these Palestinians became a terrorist platform, because it was very early on in this Zionist process that these Arabs who began to call themselves Palestinians began to terrorize Israel. You had the 29 people that were slaughtered in Hebron in 1926, I think it was, and they were butchered in sort of the same way by the same people in the same spirit that we saw 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
It was a horrible massacre.
Yes.
And you've had other massacres since then. So Israel began to say, okay, we have to defend ourselves. And they became a nation. And what does a nation do when other people are trying to destroy them? Well, they defend themselves.
They defend themselves.
And then you have the philosophy of Golda Meir. You know some of what she declared. And she was very pragmatic and very clear in her opinions that Israel has every right to defend herself.
Right.
And no nation should ever be in a place where they're forced not to.
It concerns me that the U.S. is sticking their nose into Israel's business right now. I'm concerned that Israel will see the United States as their savior.
Okay. I think the only U.S. president that earnestly duped Israel was Donald Trump.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think any other president could ever succeed in the way that Donald Trump did. They actually believed him.
Yeah.
Now, they don't believe Biden. They absolutely do not believe. They like what he's doing, and they will
They
utilize
like what he's
it.
saying right now.
They will utilize it for the
Right.
sake of their progress.
Right.
We know. I mean, is Biden speaking honestly from his heart? No, he's lying through his teeth.
Right.
He doesn't truly support Israel. You look at his career as a senator, and he was not vehemently, but he was consistently anti-Israel
He was consistently racist.
and racist. Well, we know he was a
Yeah.
racist. We
Yeah.
know that. He was and still is a blue dog Democrat. He's a racist to the bone, but he's anti-Semite, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist. He always has been. So what he's doing now is perhaps has two purposes.
Right.
One, he's there to maybe get a boost, a bump in
Right.
the polls, which he'll get.
Yeah, it's the Jewish voters here in the States are loving what he's saying right now.
He'll get that bump that he's looking for. But secondarily, which I think is more important than the initial purpose, secondarily, he's there to carry out the work of the globalists.
Mm-hmm.
He's there to say to Israel, good, you have a right to defend yourself, but you have to proportionality.
Right.
You have to temper your approach.
Right.
You
Do
have
it
to
under our directive.
correct.
Yeah.
That's why he's really there.
Yeah.
To say, I'm here to help you. Here comes the cavalry. I'm here, and we've got ships over here that can come into this conflict. I'm prepared to send Navy SEALs in, but you can't go too far with this. There's proportionality. What does proportionality really mean? So 2 weeks ago on Shabbat, on the most holy day of the Jewish
end of
people,
Sukkot, right.
Simchat Torah, Israel was pummeled. I mean, just completely pummeled. People were brutally murdered. They're saying up to 1,400 people. Brutally murdered, raped, babies, children slaughtered, people are beheaded. The most horrible scenes of this butchery was projected on the internet. A horrible thing happened. Proportionality says, well, you can go back and do just that to the Palestinians.
That much.
Mhm.
Right.
And don't go any further. Well, that's asinine, really, when you think about it, because it's not like you have 20 people standing over here that wants to attack you and kill 20 people, and you in return can kill that 20 people. No, you have a whole terrorist platform over here
Right.
with millions of people who are committed. So what does proportionality mean? That you have to just, if 1,400 people were brutally murdered, you brutally murder 14,000 people and step back and give the other, 2.5 million people an opportunity to continue the same project, the same terrorism, the same butchery in the future. No, proportionality is nonsense. You have to put an end to the prospect of that happening again.
Right. We said 15-ish years ago when Israel gave
Gush Katif.
Gush Katif to the Palestinians, we said that's not a smart idea. They realized after they did it, it's not a smart idea. It puts tactically your enemy right in your backyard and able to assault you in a much closer proximity. So
Well,
they need to take that out.
Yeah. We said it, but our voice doesn't matter.
No, right.
What matters is Israel. The Jewish people said no.
Right.
Sharon said yes. Now, why did Sharon say yes about leaving Gaza, about destroying Gush Katif, moving out of Gush Katif? Because he was receiving pressure from this nation.
Yeah.
Who was president at the time? Bush Jr.
Okay.
George Bush Jr. was president. And so you had a strong globalist push towards peace at all costs. And Sharon simply surrendered to it, and Gush Katif happened, should have never happened. So proportionality is absurd. Like I said, it's asinine to think that you can apply proportionality here.
Right.
All right. You slap me, I'll slap you back. Even though you have 20 people lined up behind you that's going to slap me once I turn away.
Right.
It's foolish. It's absurd. So the nation's pressure right now on Israel, who is Biden's pressure, because Biden he's preaching proportionality. He's preaching proportionality to Israel right now. All right. I don't think he's going to succeed. But what's going to happen is the nations are going to buy into that idea, the concept of proportionality. The nations and the media that supports the nations, that projects the opinion of the nations, is going to use this to its fullest extent. That Israel are apartheid because they're not applying proportionality to the conflict. So they're evil. It's an amazing thing. So the Palestinians, the so-called Palestinians, are pawns. Like I said earlier, pawns of the worst kind. The most dispensable of pawns are the Palestinians. Initially, when I heard about this hospital that got struck, my initial response was, yeah, it was a Palestinian attack.
Right.
That they purposely destroyed the hospital to declare Israel's evil. Now, with the information that has come out about that strike, it's clear that that's not the case, because the conversations going back and forth between the terrorists in Hamas was, we actually did this. I'm really sorry. This happened. The conversation was along those lines, which clearly indicates that it was a genuine mistake. But was it truly a mistake? All right. So when Israel came into the land of Israel with Joshua hesitated a lot in regards to carrying out God's will. All right?
He should have known better, but he didn't.
He hesitated a lot.
Yeah.
It's almost as if he didn't know how to carry out the campaign against the Canaanites. We know that he had a bit of an issue in seeking God's face. He didn't when he needed to.
Right.
He had that problem. Or I should say Israel had that problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, but ultimately God created a scenario with the Gibeonites. And you know the story with the Gibeonites, right? The people of Gibeah approached Joshua at Shiloh and said, we came from a far-off land.
Right, right.
And we're here to form an alliance with you. Look at our bread. Look at our sandals. We've got dirt on our faces. We came from a far-off land. And Joshua said, oh, really? Okay, we'll have it. Didn't seek God's face.
Right.
And God made it clear that they were not to form alliances with any of the surrounding nations.
Right. Right. That was already stated.
Right.
That was already in Torah.
So because Joshua had committed himself and Israel to this relationship, the Gibeonites in turn now, who were Canaanites, were attacked by the Amorites, different Canaanites, because of their alliance with Israel. Even the Jebusites, who Israel had an opportunity to destroy, but didn't. Even the Jebusites came from what was Salem, but became Jerusalem, to attack the Gibeonites, to punish them for this alliance.
Making the alliance.
And that was God's opportunity. And that's when Joshua, empowered by God, destroyed the 5 Amorite kings.
Right.
It was a phenomenal event because God brought boulders from the sky.
Right.
God caused these 5 kings and all of their men to flee. He destroyed the Amorite confederation. But not only that, Joshua now, having a sense of vim and vam, zeal now, he says to God, we've got the enemy on the run. Keep the sun in place for 24 hours.
Right.
And God does it.
Yeah.
You see that?
Yeah.
You know the story.
Yeah.
God holds the sun in place so that Joshua and the children of Israel can destroy the Canaanite.
He literally had to stop the universe.
Stop everything.
Everything.
So what does that tell us? That God wanted Joshua to carry this out.
Yes.
So Joshua, the children of Israel, won that campaign, but did not do what God truly wanted, which was to completely displace all of the Canaanites.
Right.
Because they were a germ, a spiritual germ in the land, and they had to go.
Right.
Joshua never, and the people of Israel never really purified the land. That germ remained in the land. Of course, and that brings us to the Philistines now.
Right.
So we've talked about that before. So what happened? Joshua failed, and King David succeeded with the Philistines. Solomon succeeded more than King David.
Right.
The Babylonians destroyed the Philistines.
What remained of them, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
And there are no Philistines today, but the world order today wants to tell us that there are. And
Right.
we should listen to the appeals that are being made on their behalf. The truth is, God wants the land to be the land of Israel. That was God's plan from the very beginning. When he brought Israel in, this is the point that I'm getting at. God wants the land to be the land of Israel and not Palestine.
Right.
Now, you would say, what type of God is that? What type of God would approve of what's happening today? God doesn't approve of destruction, but there are times when destruction leads to his ultimate purpose.
Right.
Now, I know many people will take issues with that statement, but if you take a biblical point of view, you would see very clearly in the Bible that God's going to restore Israel, the nation of Israel and the land of Israel as the people of Israel. When that happens, God refers to that as his inheritance. His inheritance. And that's likened to a man
Right.
and a wife.
Yeah.
In the Hebrew sense.
Right.
Nakla. Nakla is a Hebrew word for marriage. Nakala is the Hebrew word for inheritance. So Israel is in a very, very special place as it relates to God. God ultimately is going to move out all of the non-Israelites
Right.
from the land. The prophets are clear on this. So that sounds pretty intolerant, but
It seems intolerant, but we see the directive in Torah that the stranger can live in the land, but the stranger has to submit to the authority
Live
of the Israeli
peaceably.
government.
live peaceably with Israel. Absolutely.
Uriah the Hittite was a Hittite.
Absolutely. There were many, especially during the time of King David, there were many Canaanites even, dare I say even some Philistines
Right,
and Hittites and Ammonites
right.
and Moabites who were part of David's kingdom. And that's one of the unique characteristics of David's kingdom, right? And that's painting a picture of the son of David, his kingdom.
Right.
Would be a kingdom comprised of people from all the nations.
Right.
And there's an allegorical picture there for us. But you see, the nations today are acting very much like the Muslims. Or I should say the Muslims are acting like the nations. They're acting more or less in the same way. We cannot allow Israel to continue to prosper as Israel. We have to impede. Our president is there for that purpose. He's there to impede.
Right.
And Israel, they're not being duped by this at all. They're absolutely not being duped by this. They know who he is, like we were saying just now, and they know his history. And they know that he's a liar. I mean, the whole world knows that this president lies, and he is effectively a puppet. He doesn't speak for himself. So he's over there speaking on behalf of other people, other entities, and he's there to say to Israel, proportionality. All right. The truth is, God is not restricted to proportionality.
Right.
And our Christian sensitivities might be a little bit offended by that, but God is not concerned about proportional responses. God is going to bring about a climax of the ages that's going to render Israel a sovereign people in a sovereign land. And that's the end of the story. Now, the Bible talks about Amalek.
Right.
Amalek is the people of Molech, right? So Esau had a son, and his name was Amalek. He worshipped Molech. This was in the Negev area, south of the Negev. So Esau had a son, Amalek, who worshipped Molech. The worship of Molech is so spiritually corrupt, so spiritually depraved, that this spirit of Amalek was very strong in the land, right? Children of Israel came out of Egypt. And Amalek attacks Israel from behind.
Mm-hmm.
comes after the women and the children. Does that sound
And the
familiar?
old people.
And the old people.
Yeah.
Does that sound familiar? So where did this happen 2 weeks ago? In the south.
Right.
In the region of Amalek. You remember when we were there?
Yeah.
This year in Israel, how Mickey pointed southwards from where we were,
Right.
close to Sderot, and he said, this is where Amalek lived, the region of Amalek. So exactly where this thing happened is the ancient region of Amalek. And what we saw 2 weeks ago in Israel was Amalek.
Yeah.
Behaved just like Amalek.
Oh, yeah, heartless.
I mean, just like
Vicious.
Amalek. Attacked from behind, the women, the children.
The babies.
A horrible ambush attack at their most holiest time. So when Israel came out of Egypt and they were about to approach Mount Sinai, that was a holy and a special moment for God. God's bringing his bride to be to the chuppah, which was Mount Sinai. He's bringing Israel to that place. His intent is to betroth Israel unto himself. That's the story of Mount Sinai, and that Shavuot experience.
Right.
And
right.
he's bringing his bride to be to the mountain, and here comes this Amalek that attacks his bride. What did God say about that in Exodus chapter 17? Let's go read.
Yeah, okay.
In Exodus chapter 17.
I don't have the original Hebrew, and this is one of the times I like to have the original Hebrew.
But in Genesis chapter 17, God took offense to this. As Amalek, the people of Molech, carried out this terrorist attack on his people. Again, he's bringing them to a very special moment when he would take them to be his betrothed. And Amalek does this thing. God takes this very seriously. So if you would read, Jim, if you can read a little bit for us in 17, 8 to 16. We'll talk about this as you read.
Then Amalek came and fought against Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, choose men for us and go out. Fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand.
So pause there for a moment. Later on in Deuteronomy, Moses would provide more information about the nature of this attack. All it says here is that Amalek attacked. But what we see in Deuteronomy is that Amalek came from behind and attacked the women and the children, like you said, the weak, the infirm. This really upset God. So Moses is going up on the top of the mountain with God's staff. What does God's staff represent? His power.
And
his
authority.
Ultimate authority, right?
Joshua did as Moses told him and fought against Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill, veiled. And when he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. Did I skip?
No, I don't think so.
So it came about when Moses held his hand up that Israel prevailed. And when he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed.
Hold there. So clearly this is a spiritual battle.
Right.
There's an engagement here that's not natural, it's spiritual. Why? Because when that staff of God is taken down, or when it descends, Amalek prevails. When that staff of God is lifted up, the power of God is ascending, Amalek is defeated. And so there's a spiritual battle here. Moses, Aaron, and Hur are representing God's authority on that mountain. They're in the office of Messiah, in other words, right? So Aaron and Moses are in the office of Messiah. Hur is there to assist. So you have this picture of Moses, Aaron, and Hur on the top of this mountain in the office of Messiah, lifting up God's power, and as they do, Amalek is defeated. As they decline, as that staff descends, Amalek prevails. Spiritual, right? So we're in a spiritual battle today. This is a spiritual battle. And at this juncture, I want to say this, that the church is in the office of Messiah. We should be in the office of Messiah. We know that we are of God little children, but the whole world lies under the power of the evil one. That's what John said. But we are of God. John also said that as he is, so are we in this world. So we are the ones that are appointed by God to uphold the staff of God. We are in the office of Messiah. We are that priesthood. The church is supposed to be that priesthood. So it's for us to lift up God's staff, declaring God's power in this battle, because this is nonetheless Amalek. And this is our time to do it. This is when the church needs to band together, coalesce, and stand on that mountaintop, figuratively speaking.
Right.
There's an allegory.
Sure.
There's an allegory here that's very important. The church needs to ascend this mountain, see itself as this priesthood that has the staff of God in its hand. And we ought to band together and lift up the staff. As we do, this Amalek will be destroyed. Finish reading.
But Moses' hands were heavy. Then they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other. Thus his hands were steadied until the sun set. So Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword.
Why? Because the staff was kept up throughout the battle. There was intercession. The power of God was being manifest.
Absolutely. So Joshua, then the Lord said to Moses, write this in a book as a memorial and recite it to Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and named it, The Lord is my banner. And he said, the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation. That's not what it says in Hebrew. So it says, because a hand is against the throne of the Lord, Yah, literally, because a hand is upon the throne of Yah, he will make war with Amalek from generation to generation.
Absolutely true. So the Hebrew brings a clearer definition as to why God is upset here.
Right.
But clearly, even in the English, you can tell that God is not happy.
Right.
I will make war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now, the Hebrew says that Amalek put his hand on God's throne. What does that mean? That's an idiom. What does that idiom mean?
He's trying to usurp God's power.
He's coming against the great king.
Right.
God took that very seriously. And so we have the situation today when Amalek did kind of what they did back at that time. So how do you think God wants to respond to this? Who's going to climb the mountain? Who has that responsibility to be that vessel? I mean, clearly, this is Amalek. It happened in the region of ancient Amalek.
Right.
It happened right there, and it's very much Amalek. They went after women and children. They were brutal. They were horrible. Amalek hates children. Molech.
Right.
The worship of Molech is the slaughter of children.
Right. Burned in fire. That happened also. Last week.
They torched houses with people in it. They beheaded people. Amalek.
Yeah.
Right. You know, it's interesting because Balaam, at the end of his discourse, at the end of his oracle, his prophecy, one of the last things he said was in Numbers chapter 24, I think verse 26, he said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but its end will be destruction. That's a very important statement. Remember, God said that I will make war against Amalek from generation to generation, right? So ultimately, in the end, Amalek is completely destroyed by God himself. He's going to do it.
Right.
But Balaam said, Amalek was the first of the nations. Its end will be destruction. So what is Balaam talking about? Well, Balaam's prophecy was accurate. The first nation following the flood, and I think you can say the first legitimate nation, was not created by God, which was Babel. God didn't create Babel. The first nation that God created was Israel. And that's why he refers to Israel as my firstborn. What he means by that is my firstborn of the nations. Israel is God's firstborn of all the nations. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, you see that. God allotted the nations based on the sons of Israel.
Okay.
The number of sons of Israel.
Yeah.
So, that's the reality. God never brought Babel into existence. Babel was not his creation. Man created Babel, and that was the first nation.
Right.
So it was the first of the nations. Its end will be destruction, and this is the point, at the hands of God. God will bring an end to Amalek. So that says from generation to generation, this Amalek will continue to exist all the way up to the end of the millennial kingdom. The final manifestation of Amalek is Gog and Magog, or Gog of Magog.
Yes.
That's final Amalek. We know that because that's the final conflict, and God will destroy that Amalek in the end. But what we're seeing today is very much Amalek. I said just now that the nations, the United Nations, and Islam has something in common, which is their fear and hatred of Israel. Well, this is leading to an end when all the nations, together with Islam, will come against Israel, ultimately to destroy Israel, and that's when that manifestation of Amalek will be destroyed. Who will destroy that manifestation of Amalek? Well, Jesus.
Right.
According to Revelation chapter 19, right? So you're going to have a fusion, you're going to have an alliance, if you want to use that word, between the nations, which will comprise of all the nations, and the what might be a caliphate, an Islamic caliphate. They're going to come together because they have a common enemy, and they will work to destroy Israel. This is Amalek. This is perhaps the strongest picture of Amalek that we will see, short of Gog and Magog. And they're going to attempt to do this final thing, which is the final solution, the final time. That's what they're going to attempt. And that's when God will carry out what he promised. He will make war with Amalek. And that generation of Amalek will be completely subdued and destroyed. Absolutely victorious. Israel will be victorious. So today there's a lot of wringing of hands in Israel. They're wonderful, wonderful pictures of a lot of rejoicing, a lot of a sense of victory and an impending celebration of victory in Israel, but they're truly afraid.
Yeah.
They're afraid. And they know very well that one of the ways by which to curb that fear is to celebrate, to sing and to dance, have your soldiers sing and rejoice. Run videos of it. It gives a good impression of a sense of victory all. And they need it because they have every reason to be afraid right now. And as we've talked about many, many times on this program and otherwise, this is very much Jacob returning from Mesopotamia.
Right.
And he is about to come face to face with God. He's approaching the Jabbok. And he's very afraid. Esau is Amalek. Esau is wanting to destroy him. He has nowhere to go. He can't go east.
Right.
He can't go south.
Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide.
go. He's there on the Jabbok with his sons, his family, his everything. He's there and he's vulnerable. To say he's vulnerable doesn't suffice. He is a sitting duck with nowhere to go. But the truth is, that's where God wanted him. Afraid, desperate, so that he would look to God. And he came face to face with God. And he struggled with God and overcame. No longer was he Yaakov, a supplanter. He became Israel, a prince with God. And that happened. As we've said before, this is allegorical. Israel today is very much at the Jabbok, afraid. Nowhere to go. Where can they go? Could they go back to the diaspora? Well, no.
No.
Because they hate you more out there in the diaspora, Israel.
Right.
So you're locked in. And more that's going to be Israel's position, predicament.
It's interesting that so many Jews are free to go anywhere they want in the world, but many are answering the call to return right now and to fight as reservists.
Listen, the Jewish people, the people of Israel, are well seasoned.
Yeah.
And they're very wise. They're not foolish people. They're very, very wise. They know very well that there's no hope for them among the nations, and that what's building in the nations right now will ultimately lead to something worse than the Nazis. They know it. They know very well, I promise you, that the Jewish communities in this great country that they've had freedom of religion for now 250 years almost, they know very well that this is coming to an end.
Right.
They know it. They're very shrewd when it comes to this. They know very well, even the Jews of South America, they're seeing Hezbollah infiltrating South America. They're seeing the beginnings of anti-Semitism, anti-Israelism, anti-Zionism building in even South America. Where can they go? They have nowhere to go. They're very much like Jacob at the Jabbok.
Yeah.
And that leads to we know where. All right? We know where it's going. It's going to this incredible place where Israel, Yaakov, they're still Yaakov,
Yeah.
will come face to face with their God, and they will struggle with him. And just when it seems like things couldn't get worse,
Right.
the dawn will arise.
I mean, this could very easily, Biden said again today, if you're thinking of attacking Israel, don't. But that goes as far as his word goes. And somebody will press that. Yeah. Someone will see if he means what he's saying.
Well,
and this could be the big one.
Yeah. The globalists are very much involved in this whole thing. They're not absent from this. They're very much involved in this. And we know that Biden is a puppet of the globalists.
Right.
There's no question about it. Like Obama, he's a puppet. Obama was a smarter puppet. He was a more well put together puppet than Biden is. Biden is messy as a puppet. He's missing some strings.
Yeah.
So the point I want to make here before we bring this to an end is, yes, this can be, like you said, can be leading to the big one. We know from the standpoint of the book of Revelation, New Testament standpoint, that the river Euphrates is going to dry up so that the kings of the east can march into the land of Israel, and this of course is Armageddon, what we call Armageddon. Right. This is not in the Hebrew scriptures.
Oh, okay.
It does not exist in the Hebrew context, but the book of Revelation is very clear on this. Now, we know that our president, the same one that's over there now saying words, left a lot of equipment in Afghanistan.
Right.
Wonderful equipment.
Yeah, armed the Afghan army.
Lots of it.
Yeah.
There were a lot of saber rattling a week or so ago about the Taliban taking the very same machinery and weaponry and marching over to Israel. They're talking about it. They didn't actually begin the process. So it's not hard for us to see that a time will come because the Euphrates is dried up. If a massive army were coming from the east, Pakistanis, Afghanistanis, Iranians, people from Iraq as well, Iraqis, if they decided to march against Israel, a massive army, the logistics would seem impossible, but the logistics would be more impossible if there was a river.
Right.
Because there's no river, they can easily cross over.
You either have to ferry cross everybody over in groups or...
Their tanks, their machinery can easily cross over. So the Bible is very clear. The Euphrates will dry up so that the way of the kings of the east will be provided for them and they will march against Israel.
And the river's dry.
And the river is dry.
It's dry enough to drive a tank through it,
Absolutely.
At least. Yeah.
So we've never seen anything like this in history. This testifies to the reality that we're in that time.
Yeah.
We're in that time. And should Israel lash out against Iran, and I think they will have no choice but to do it when Hezbollah decides to strike from the north, then that might create the catalyst. Think about it. Iran is not an advanced military force by any means. They have a large army. That's pivotal to this point. They have a very large army, a lot of machinery, but they don't have the technical capacity to deal with Israel. So let's just say hypothetically that Israel takes out all of their high-tech capabilities, which makes them even more dependent on the machinery and the foot soldiers.
Right.
Can't you see that once something like that happens, They will decide, that's it, we're going to march. And they have a large army.
Well, right. And the longer they sit, the more food you have to come up with to feed them.
The logistics of an army coming from all the way Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq seems impossible, but it's not. It's not impossible. They may have a globalist order facilitating them and providing for them.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to what I'm saying, that's why Biden is there.
Yeah.
He's there to represent not so much the United States of America or the people, he's there to represent the purpose of the globalists. Now, that's controversial, but I absolutely know it to be true because it fits in alignment with what the Bible gives us about end-time prophecy relative to Israel. There are a lot of people who teach prophecy, they write books, they make millions, but they do it in such a way as to avoid the reality of what is actually happening and the inevitability of what's going to happen when this Battle of Armageddon unfolds. And that's exactly where we are. This is about Armageddon. How will Israel fare in this battle? Well, this is actually Esau as it relates to the analogy. Esau and his, how many men? 500 men?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact number. 400, I think
This
it was.
is Esau and his 400 men that was coming from the north.
Right.
Coming against Israel. And so, yeah, Armageddon's going to happen. But what happened with Jacob and his experience? He struggled with God. He didn't struggle with Amalek necessarily directly. He struggled with God. And what was that struggle about, Jim? Should I stand here and be a sitting target or should I run?
Run away.
I want to run.
Right. He wants to run away.
I
wants to finagle and wheel and deal and make it work.
One of the factors that kept him steady and kept him to allow him to stay put is his prayer before he went down to the Jabbok. He had a genuine spiritual moment. And I think it's the first time we see that with Jacob.
Yeah.
When he left the land, he kind of struck a deal with God. God, if you are my God,
Sure.
if you promise to be my God, give me a shirt and feed me with bread and keep me going, then I'll serve you. Here's a pillar. I make a pillar for you. Put some oil on it, a religious thing. And
Right.
that was not a deep, real prayer. But on the way back, when he encountered the angels at Mahanaim, is when he prayed. A genuine prayer.
Right.
A powerful prayer. And a prayer that was meaningful. And that's when he was ready for face-to-face with God encounter. I think Israel today is right there. They are right there where their prayer is deep, it's meaningful, and they're ready for a face-to-face with God. It's going to happen.
Well, there's a lot of people that we know over there that are there.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people we encounter over there that aren't quite there yet.
Right. And so, listen, 3 weeks ago, Israel was divided.
Yes, right?
Remember
in a heartbeat, they were unified.
Remember how I agonized over the condition of Israel. And many of us did.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, what is happening to Israel? They're so divided.
Right.
You can barely recognize them as Israel. And my heart was broken.
Right.
Well, it wasn't 2.5 hours after that whole thing on Simchat Torah that Israel snapped together. I mean, they really, really came together. They still have some issues. There are people that are, squabbling about Bibi, his lack of whatever, but they're one people.
I think he's doing pretty good right now.
You know what I heard as of yesterday, but you know what I heard? His interaction with Biden.
Yeah, right.
You know what I heard that's incredible and it's verifiable? Thousands upon thousands of Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, enlisting. They're signing up to join the military.
Right.
That's
Who would have thought that would ever happen?
That's unheard of.
Right.
Because they've been so anti-Zionist,
right,
anti-land of Israel. Now they're signing up to go fight.
They used to say to Arafat, come rule over us. These Jewish people can't be in the right place at the right time.
Amazing. So when I saw that, I said, no, I have to verify it. I looked at sources and these ultra-Orthodox Jews are signing up to go out and fight. in large numbers. That's unity. That's oneness. That's yachad.
Yeah.
And that's what Israel needs. And that is actually, I said that they snap together as one people. That is actually, according to the analogy with Jacob becoming focused. I've got to go down to the valley.
Yeah.
I've got to go down to the Jabbok. I have no choice. I have to trust God. I'm going down, and this thing happens. And he's born again. You see, the entire nation of Israel, as we've said many, many times, is going to be born again.
Yeah.
Completely transformed. And God has this new covenant set for Israel when they will all know him, from the least to the greatest. And he will be their God, and they will be his people. That's where this is going. So for Christians, if I could admonish Christians, recognize who you are. Recognize your most vital priesthood, and that it is real. It is not something in the hereafter. It is not nebulous. It is real. We are a part of a priesthood. Jesus declared it. Peter drew important references to that. And if we're a priesthood, we have function. What is the function? I want to encourage you to dig into this. We've talked about the function of the priesthood quite a bit. Well, your function is going to include you as Christians standing on that mountaintop in Messiah.
Interceding.
And the time for us to do this is now. This is the time. We ought to find that mountain, get to the top of the mountain, hold up the staff of God, which is the power of God, and begin our office. The time for us to become this priesthood is now. It is now. Jesus said, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith in the earth? Believers interceding, lifting up that staff. Only the priest has that responsibility. Moses was a priest, and so was Aaron. You know, the staff of Aaron. So here we are. This is it. Dare I say this is the big one? Perhaps. If this isn't it, it's close to that final conflict. And it's awesome. It's scary. But it's powerful. And it's something that we should rejoice in. And like the Israeli army, when we rejoice in the face of conflict, when we rejoice, when we praise God in the face of adversity, we empower God's movement. We empower him to move. And that's what this is about. For us right now, we ought to be praising God more than ever before, and this will empower God. God rides upon the praises of his people. We know the verses. So this is where we are. It's time for us to man up as a Christianity. Our Christianity of 5 years ago no longer is valid. We have to do away with that other Christianity that's really all about us, our benefits. We have to look at Christianity as a way by which we will serve God in his kingdom and stand as Moses, Aaron, and Hur on that mountaintop. This is it. This is where we are.
That's our program. If these questions that we are addressing raise more questions in your thinking, you are at liberty to communicate with us and share those questions with us, and we may choose to deal with that topic. Let us know your questions. Please, you can do so by emailing us at voice@buildupzion.org. Again, that's voice@buildupzion.org. And until next week, shalom.